You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Packers Talk.
You're listening to No Huddle Radio on the Packers Talk Radio Network, your home for in-depth and thoughtful Packers analysis. I'm your host, Gil Martin. My co-host is my good friend, Sean Tehan. In addition to this show, I write for the PackersPost.com and Cheesehead TV. And Sean was a TV sportscaster in Minnesota.
You're listening to Packers Talk.
You're all here for one thing. That's the love for Green Bay football. Sean, we are getting closer to OTAs and the offseason continues to progress. And yet, with no games, the Packers took a loss this week. We're going to talk about that. But first, how about a word from our sponsor?
And not only the Packers, I felt like most of the league took a loss this week. And just the Packers happened to be the team that was labeled on it. But let's get to our sponsor of our show. It's sponsored by Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packer fans, as well as Bucks, Brewers, and Summerfest tickets. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. That's theticketking.com. Remember to support local Wisconsin businesses. And if you're watching with us on YouTube, Facebook, thank you so much for tuning in. You can see the link right there on your screen, theticketking.com. You can watch every episode of No Huddle Radio on Packers Talk Network with Gil and myself on YouTube. Click on the bell, turn the notifications on, join the discussion, chat with us live. We'd love to see and talk about the comments coming our way. And it was a lot of chatter this week for spring league meetings. And obviously the Packers were the face of the conversation, really, Gil. They were the ones who proposed the ban on the Tush Push. It was tabled back during the owners' meetings at the end of March. And then essentially they revised the language a little bit where they just want aiding and pulling and pushing the ball carrier to go away. And it seemed like it had some good momentum. The reports were that morning earlier this week that this was going to go. This was going to go through. And then all of a sudden, some things changed. And it was 22 votes in favor of essentially banning the Tush Push and 10 votes not in favor of banning it. But the thing is, the NFL needs 3/4 votes. So they were 2 votes short of that going through. So the Tush Push, it's staying. And the Packers are taking a lot of arrows right now, Gil. Is it fair? Is it unfair? What do you make of this?
I don't think it's fair. And here's the biggest reason why. The Packers were the face of this proposal, but they were not the source of this proposal. And the fact that, first of all, the Packers, in the 2 games they played with the Eagles, probably did a better job of stopping the Tush Push than almost any other team that faced Philadelphia this year. Second of all, because the Packers do not have a specific owner, the fact that like you and I own stock in the Green Bay Packers allowed them to propose this without ruffling any feathers. So the story behind the story is that a bunch of owners who didn't like the Tush Push got together and asked the Packers essentially to put this proposal forward. And that way, none of them had to take the heat for making the proposal and look like, oh, we're sore losers. We can't stop it. So we want to make sure it's banned. And, I think the criticism that we're seeing is mostly from fans on social media. I think maybe 75, 80% of it is in good fun, or at least started out that way. Mm-hmm. I don't think, the actual owners or the actual general managers are actually upset about this or blaming the Packers in any way. But I still think it's a mistake that this play remains part of the National Football League.
And it seemed like the Packers, obviously, you had to have a team propose it, and the Packers are willing to do that. You don't have an owner, like you said, Gil, and you have a team president who's also retiring this summer. Right. So it was just very easy for the Packers to be like, hey, we'll take one for the team. We'll do this. We'll look like the bad guys here. We'll look like the cowards here. And it's just not really a good thing because guess what? 21 other teams wanted this to not be in existence anymore. And it seemed like the NFL definitely didn't want this play anymore. And there was some serious momentum there where at the very end, remember back in March, it was a 16-16 vote. They tabled it to this past Wednesday, and then they just didn't have the votes. And that's just, it's a problem. And the Packers definitely are receiving unfair criticism, in my opinion, Gil, where it's funny because as soon as the ruling came out that, yep, like we're not going to change this, it's allowed to stay, the Eagles Twitter account posted a push on image. And Aaron Nagler pointed out on Twitter, it's funny because the image they're posting, the Packers didn't allow a first down on that play.
Right.
It's just a matter of, like, the Packers are one of the more successful teams against the tush push since it's been a thing the last few years. And it's just, they're just taking unfair criticism. That Week 10 game on Monday Night Football, when Philly comes to Green Bay, it could be pretty hostile. There could be some bad blood between these teams. But remember, it's like there are only 9 other teams besides the Eagles who didn't want this to go away. So that you just got to keep that in mind going forward.
No doubt. And look, the Packers have run their own version of it with Tucker Kraft carrying the ball and being pushed, and it's been pretty successful for them. But at the end of the day, this is a rugby play. This is not a football play. The rule for so long was you can't push the ball carrier forward. And it became a problem because of judgment calls that, were they intentionally pushing? Were they just pushing the pile? Were they trying to get someone off of the ball carrier? So you always want to try to minimize judgment calls by officials. So I get why they got rid of it, but this is sort of an abuse in the other direction. And I would like to see them find some kind of a middle ground that allows the rule to state you cannot push the player forward, but it hasn't happened. And, it's weird to say something failed 22-10 when 22 people wanted to change it. It just sounds a little wrong.
And the thing is also, it's just on defense, you can't push a defender into a player. Like you can't push, you can't aid a defender. So why is this allowed for the offense? You know what I mean? That's just very interesting to me too. And I think maybe something they do next year, because I think this is going to keep coming up until something goes through where maybe you don't let offensive linemen put 2 hands on the ground. Maybe that's a solution, because the big thing is like offsides on offensive linemen. Yeah, it's been called a little more, but the NFL kind of seems to pick and choose their moments when they want to call that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good middle ground right there, where it's like you offensive linemen can only have 1 hand in the ground. And I know it's like, even when I played football back in high school, short yard situation, goal to go situation, we were taught, yep, both hands on the ground and you're just diving. You're just diving. But they really got to, I feel like the NFL's really got to heavily emphasize the offensive offsides, because that's definitely an issue as well. The Packers got called for it a little bit too much a couple of years ago, and kind of egregious when other teams like the Eagles were way more egregious about it, but weren't being called for anything. So it's interesting. And it's interesting also, Gil, one of the 22 teams that also wanted it banned were the Buffalo Bills. And Buffalo and the Eagles are 2 of the most successful teams running that tush push play. And even Buffalo didn't feel a need to move forward with it.
Yeah, the vast majority of the league doesn't want this play to be part of the game. But you need 3 quarters, as you said. They came up just short. And I think you're right. We have not seen the last proposal to ban the tush push.
To be continued, my friend, to be continued. And other notes from the spring meetings this past week, teams can now declare an onside kick at any point during a game when they're trailing. I believe that was only in the 4th quarter of games last year where they could declare an onside kick. Now that has changed. You kick an onside kick in quarter 1 if you're trailing. Quarter 2, who cares? And then the NFL reseeding based on record instead of divisional status, a rule change that was proposed by the Detroit Lions, that was removed. Not enough votes, so we're still going to have the 1 through 4 division champion models, and then the top 3 wild cards 5 through 7. So very interesting conundrum, especially with the NFC North, how loaded that division is.
Yeah, I don't understand I like the onside kick change to a point, but why do you have to be trailing? Like, what's the difference? You should just be able. The odds of succeeding now with these rules on an onside kick are less than 5%. Why not just let a team? If it's tied, you can't do it. If you're ahead, you can't. You already took away the element of surprise because you have to declare it. Yeah. I don't get it. I really don't get it.
And we'll see. Well, that's probably going to be tweaked next year where it's like, yep, you can just declare an onside whenever you want. Doesn't matter if you're winning or trailing, who cares, or tied. So moving on, though, the Packers, their round 1 pick out of Texas, wide receiver Matthew Golden. He just signed a contract agreement with the Packers this past week. Again, Golden, the first wide receiver picked in round 1 by the Packers since Javon Walker in 2002. So green and gold, that's full steam ahead, Gil. And the Packers, remember, they drafted a wide receiver in round 3 in TCU's Savion Williams. And there's a lot of question marks with this receiver room with the Christian Watson injury, with the struggles last year with Jaden Reed at the end of the year, Dontavian Wicks with the hands, Romeo Dobbs with conduct detrimental with the team, and he had drop issues as well. There's a lot of uncertainty in this wide receiver room. Should the Packers consider shaking it up this offseason with a few months to go before training camp, or maybe during training camp?
I do not think they should rush into anything right now. Okay. Injuries are always a factor. Lord knows the Packers have dealt with enough of those in their wide receiver core over the years. You don't know how much you're going to get right away from rookies. They are unpredictable and usually inconsistent. And theoretically, the value of some of these players could go up as you get closer to the start of the season. Other teams could have players get injured, and all of a sudden their need for a wide receiver increases. You could even wait for the NFL trade deadline, which is usually, late October, early November. Mm-hmm. I would not rush into shaking things up in the wide receiver room unless there's a receiver on this team that is so unhappy that they're causing problems in the locker room that cannot be solved.
And you got to think, too, remember Josh Jacobs made those comments on Radio Row during Super Bowl week about how they need a wide receiver 1. And Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks on social media took exception. They didn't really particularly care for those comments. And guess what? They got to perform better. And Josh Jacobs was right. He wasn't saying anything that was wrong. I think he was pretty spot on with that. Just because they definitely took a step back in year 2 for both of them, where their rookie seasons, they look like, okay, they look like they could be future stars in this league. Then you had Romeo Dobbs with the conduct detrimental, obviously not happy with the amount of volume that he was getting in the passing game. He's got concussion problems too, and I hope that's not a lingering issue. We saw what happened with Sam Shields, where his career was kind of shortened because of that, and that's scary stuff. You just like Brian Goodkin said after the A.J. Dillon injury during training camp, the neck injury during training camp last year, you don't mess with the head, neck, or the heart. And the head's probably the biggest one, that you start from the top. And it's very interesting because Christian Watson's not going to be ready to go by the start of the year. If he were, that would be very shocking, but probably going to start the season on the PUP list. And you draft 2 guys with premium draft selections. So someone's going to be left out. And you got Bo Melton and Malik Heath who were on this team last year, both guys who have shown flashes. Bo Melton was the first 100-yard receiver in a game in 2023, that's right, which was crazy on that New Year's Eve night in Minneapolis. And then Malik Heath, you've seen what he can do. He's good in contested situations. He's a darn good run blocker, a willing run blocker. So you wonder what's going to happen here. And I feel like if they were to trade one guy, if they consider trading one guy, I think I would consider trading Romeo Dobbs. I would. That would be the first one. But I don't know what you think, but that's where I would lean if I were thinking about moving a guy.
If I'm trading one guy, he would probably be the leading candidate. And here's my logic to it. He probably doesn't have as high a ceiling as the other players in the room. He's probably better than some of them right now, more consistent, but he doesn't have as high of a ceiling. And if you have a glut of players at the position, if you have to trade one, it makes more sense to trade the guy that doesn't have as high of a ceiling. Look, the other guys may never reach that ceiling, but you want to give them every chance to do so.
Now, we'll get into roster predictions as we get closer to camp before the Packers open up training camp. But if you were to say right now, Gil, how this receiver room looks in the initial 53-man roster, do they keep 5? Do they keep 6? How do you think it's going to be?
I think they keep 6. I think there is a small chance they keep 7. But that may depend on the ability of one of those players to do other things like return kicks and punts.
Yeah, I would think 6 for sure. I
Yes.
would think it's going to be 6 guys. I think Watson, I'm not counting Watson in that
Nope.
group because he's not going to count against a roster spot. But I would think if it seems like on paper right now, that final, if it is 6 receivers, that final receiver spot could come down to Malik Heath and Bo Melton. And I would probably say Malik Heath would have the edge because he is such a willing and tough run blocker, something that Christian Watson always brings when he's out there on the field. And they're going to be missing that for most of the season coming up. And Bo Melton, I feel like his game, it's too similar to what Matthew Golden's going to bring to this offense.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I mean, Golden can bring a lot of the things that Bo Melton does. You have Jaden Reed can run the jet sweeps. Savion Williams can run the jet sweeps that Bo Melton often ran. And I like Bo Melton. I would love to see him hang around, but I think he's probably the odd man out. So if you're looking at 6, Golden and Williams are going to be locks, barring injury. You have Romeo Doubs. You have, you have Dontavian Wicks. You're not looking at too many spots. You're really talking about, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Matthew Golden, Savion Williams, and then one spot left, and you have the top 3 candidates being Malik Heath, Bo Melton, and then Mecole Hardman would, I guess, be the next highest.
I forgot about him.
Yeah. So that's why, if Hardman impresses as a return specialist, I could see them keeping a 7th receiver on the roster, but he may never or hardly ever see the field as a receiver.
It's going to be an interesting situation coming up. But Gil, let me ask you this too. Since we're both on board with if the Packers move a receiver, if they do trade Romeo Doubs, we get it. He's coming up on a contract year. What would you take right now if a team called the Packers like, we want Romeo Doubs? What would you take right now in a trade for him?
I would want like a day 2 draft pick.
Yeah.
Or a player who I could slot in a position of need. If the Jair Alexander thing goes south, I would love to add a cornerback to the room, a quality cornerback, for example. But if we're talking picks, I'm looking day 2. How about you? What are you looking at?
Well, I think Brian Gutekunst would think the same way as you. Remember when Will Fuller a deal was almost made for Will Fuller from formerly of the Houston Texans a few years ago, and the whole holdup was the Packers are willing to give up a 4th-round pick, but the Texans want a 3rd-round pick. And I feel like Brian Gutekunst operates the same way, where he's like, hey, I'll trade this guy for a 3rd-round pick. And you essentially kind of you put the pressure on the other side. That's what happened with Rasul Douglas when they traded him. They got a 3rd-round pick in a Rasul Douglas trade at the trade deadline a few years ago, where Buffalo probably only wanted to give up a 4th, but like, you know what? We want this guy too much. We're going to give up a 3rd-round pick. So I think Brian Gutekunst would take that. I think I would take a 4th-round pick. I think I would, but 3rd round would be a lot sweeter. But like you said, Gil, if you're trading right now, a day 2 pick would make a lot more sense, where that's when you make a deal, because you don't know what's going to happen in camp coming up, and you want to make sure you have some assurance in case things do go south in that room.
Right. Exactly.
And speaking of, we're talking Matthew Golden, we're talking Savion Williams. Let's do a little bit of over-under, Gil, with the Packers 2025 rookie class. And let's start out with the 1st-round pick from Texas, Matthew Golden. Over-under 45.5 receptions this season. And keep in mind, teammate Jaden Reed, he set a Packers rookie record a couple of years ago with 64 catches in 2023. Last year in the NFL, Brock Bowers led all rookies with 112 catches. Wide receiver Malik Neighbors led all rookie wide receivers with 109 catches. I don't think Matthew Golden's going to get those numbers, but it's kind of a crowded room at receiver for the Packers. Over under 45.5 receptions for Matthew Golden this year.
I think it's over. I'm not saying it's like 103, but I think it's over. Look, there are, as we have been discussing, a lot of options in this receiver room, but I could see him getting somewhere in the 50s as far as the number of receptions this year. Again, assuming he stays healthy.
And I was thinking about putting this over under like 50.5, just to but make it interesting. But the way I see it, I think the Packers are going to lean a lot on Jaden Reed again in the passing game. I think Marshawn Lloyd is going to be a big factor on the backfield in the passing game. And I think they're going to lean more into Tucker Kraft this year. And Tucker Kraft and Jaden Reed led this team in receiving and catches last year.
Right.
And I think Matt LaFleur is going to try to craft more plays for Tucker. That was pun intended right there. And I just don't think there's going to be as many opportunities for Matthew Golden as expected. And they really like, it seems like they typically just like to bring rookies along, but who knows? I could be wrong. He could defy the situations that have usually been in Green Bay.
We'll see. I don't think you draft a guy in the first round to not put him on the field, but it is a crowded room. And, does he develop that trust with Jordan Love? We'll have to find out.
Training camp will be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing the green and golden in a flash coming up this summer. Over under for NC State offensive lineman Anthony Belton, second round pick for the Packers. Over under 2.5 starts for Anthony Belton this season.
Barring a major injury, I think this is under. I think it's a crowded offensive line, and I think they drafted him kind of with the idea of letting him get his feet wet on special teams. They may rotate him in for a few series like they did with Sean Ryan, like they did with Jordan Morgan before he got hurt. But I don't see a place for him to start unless he just comes out day one of training camp and wows everybody.
And I'm going the opposite of you again, Gil. I'm going over, mainly because I think the Packers O-line was very healthy last year until obviously that Philadelphia game when they lost Elton Jenkins, where Jordan Morgan, their first-round pick from 2024, made one start. And that was the one game that Josh Myers missed. Besides that, they had the same starting five with Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Myers, Sean Ryan, and Zach Tom. You hope that the Packers' offensive line is as healthy as they were a season ago, but you just can't count on that, especially at that position group. And the universe has a cruel way of balancing itself out, Gil. And I feel like Anthony Belton could be starting 3 or more games this year out of necessity. Obviously, I think the Packers, they want to make sure they bring him along and develop him properly before throwing him into the fire. But you never know what's going to happen going forward. And there's that guy in Cincinnati, Trey Hendrickson, who's available in a trade. He's not happy with Cincy. I'm saying the Packers, what if you throw in a Sean Ryan or a Jordan Morgan in there? Anthony Belton could be sliding in for duty sooner rather than later.
Yeah, he could be. And like I said, I prefaced it with if everybody's healthy, I think it's an under. But, if nobody is traded, I don't think Belton is the first guy to step in because you'll either have Jordan Morgan or Rasheed Walker ahead of him most likely on the depth chart, depending on what position, we're filling in for. Be interesting.
I'm not rooting for injuries, but I'm just saying it's just the universe, man. You don't mess with the universe. That's all I'm saying. Let's go to the Packers' third-round pick. TCU wide receiver Savion Williams. Over under 1.5 rushing touchdowns for Savion Williams this year. And just remember, this guy was a gadget guy at TCU. He scored 12 total touchdowns last season, 6 receiving and 6 rushing. Matt LaFleur is probably going to utilize him quite a bit to change things up, have a more versatile look on offense. To give you some context as well, Jane Reed had a rushing touchdown last year. Christian Watson had 2 rushing touchdowns as a rookie in 2022. Kansas City's Xavier Worthy had 3 rushing touchdowns as a rookie last year to lead all NFL wide receivers. Over under 1.5 rushing touchdowns for Savion Williams.
It's going to be close, but I'm going over on Savion Williams. I think they'll run some gadget plays. They'll run the end arounds. Those push passes do count as receptions. Otherwise, even though they are essentially forward handoffs for the most part, but I still think he'll get 2. I mean, I'm not saying it's 7 here, but I think he'll be over 1.5.
I think this is going to be under as well. I keep going the opposite way of you, Gil. It's funny because usually our minds think alike.
Yeah, but we're usually pretty close with our analysis here.
Yeah, absolutely. I just don't think the usage is going to be as high with him as we think, as we're projecting, or as we're possibly hoping, because he could be a really, really fun piece. I mean, this seems like a bigger Deebo Samuel. That's right. That's what it could potentially be. But it's never a guarantee what's going to happen. But I do think he is going to get a rushing touchdown this year. I think he's going to get 1, but I think 1.5, anything more than 2 or more, that's going to be really great. I just think, especially given the Packers running back situation where Josh Jacobs is such a bell cow and He just has a knack for finding the end zone, especially in those tough situations. You're going to get a little more Marshawn Lloyd, hopefully, this year. Emmanuel Wilson, too. And you hope that, though, like Jaden Reed is not going to be as much in the running game this year. I hope Savion Williams takes those hits, essentially, coming out of the backfield. But I think it's going to be under, but just slightly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be over, but just slightly. So I'm basically saying 2, and you're basically saying 1. So
perfect. We're in agreement then. Over under. Let's go with Packers 4th-round pick, from Texas, Barron Sorrell, and Oklahoma State edge rusher Colin Oliver. Over under 4.5 total sacks for Sorrell and Oliver. Oliver had 23.5 sacks in his collegiate career for the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Played only 2 games last year, had a sack, 11.5 sacks as a freshman for the Cowboys. And then Sorrell had 15.5 sacks in his collegiate career with the Longhorns. LA Rams defensive tackle Braden Fisk led all rookies last year with 8.5 sacks. Miami linebacker Chop Robinson led all rookie linebackers and edge rushers with 6 sacks alone in 2024. Over under 4.5 total sacks for Barron Sorrell and Colin Oliver in 2025.
Wait, is that combined?
Combined.
Oh, okay. See, I thought it was each one individually.
No, total. Yep.
Okay, total. It's close, but I'm still going under, which is what I had originally. Why? Edge rushers take a little bit of time, and these guys are not going to be like starting, barring significant injuries, and they're probably, 4th or 5th on the depth chart. So I just don't see them getting a lot of opportunities unless the guys in front of them either stumble or get injured.
We're in agreement. I also think under as well, where I am interested to see where Jeff Hafley is not a dummy, and he's probably my favorite defensive coordinator that we've had in Green Bay for a long time, maybe since year 2 Dom Capers, honestly.
Okay.
Where that Super Bowl defense was clicking so much. And I feel like Jeff Hafley is going to possibly use these guys, especially Colin Oliver, a guy who's very quick off the edge in passing situations, just in pure passing downs. I think he's going to use them a little more than we expect. But the whole thing is where are they going to be in that edge rotation? That's the big question, because you have Rashawn Gary, you have Lucas Van Ness, you have Kingsley Enagbare. Brenton Cox Jr. had flashes last year. Aaron Mosby was a surprise addition to the 53-man roster a season ago. The snaps, the competition for edge rotation snaps, it's likely going to be between Cox, Mosby, Sorrell, and Oliver. And I could see them very much I think obviously the Packers are going to keep Sorrell and Oliver. I don't think they're going anywhere, but it's not a guarantee, because I think it's definitely going to be a competitive situation for snaps on the back end of the edge spot.
And to me, the question is this: how quickly do they pick up the system and make the adjustment? Because I could see in the first half of the season them being inactive, one of them at least being inactive for several of those games.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting situation to see what happens. The training camp competition for the back end of the edge rotation is going to be a good one to watch. There's going to be a lot of good position group battles in general.
Oh, yeah.
Over under, let's go to Packers 6th-round pick, defensive tackle Warren Brinson of Georgia. He's essentially the first D tackle was picked in the 2025 draft. They got some guys in undrafted free agency, including his teammate Nazir Stackhouse. Over under 6.5 active games for Warren Brinson coming up in 2025. Keep in mind, 2024 6th-round pick Travis Glover, he was active for 7 games last year. So that's why I'm putting the over under at 6.5, just a shade under that. Where do you think that's going to be for Warren Brinson coming up in 2025?
Again, barring injuries to the guys in front of him, I think it's under. I think it's close. You pick good numbers. You must know how Vegas thinks about these things. But I think he'll probably play like 5 or 6 games this year.
I think it's going to be over. And the way I see it is that I think there are 3 defensive tackles on this team who are guaranteed, if they're healthy, they're guaranteed to be activated for every game. That's Kenny Clark, it's Devontae Wyatt, and that's Carl Brooks. And I think a rotation spot is up for grabs between Warren Brinson, between Colby Wooden, who hasn't really taken a strong hold of any spot on this roster, and undrafted free agent Nazir Stackhouse. Now, there is an opening because of TJ Slayton's departure in free agency. So you're really going to have a good competition between Brinson, Wooden, and Stackhouse. And Brinson beats out. It's going to be very interesting because Brinson, I feel like, is more of a run stuffer, more so than Colby Wooden. He's a little bit of a bigger body than Colby Wooden. But Naz Stackhouse also is a big body too.
He's even bigger.
Yeah, he's even a bigger boy, which is crazy. These guys are huge. I don't know what they ate growing up, but holy smokes. So I think there's going to be a possibility that we're going to see Warren Brinson a little more than expected. And remember, Carl Brooks, he also was a 6th-round pick a few years ago. But Carl Brooks, obviously, that was tremendous value that they got in the back end of the draft. Who knows? Maybe Warren Brinson will be the same. And Brian Gutekunst loves his Georgia boys, Gil.
He does. He most certainly does.
And next up, we have cornerback Micah Robinson from Tulane. Over under 60.5 defensive snaps for Micah Robinson. Now, just want to preface this by saying safety Ketan Oladapo last year had 68 total defensive snaps as a rookie. He was a 5th-round pick. 7th-rounder Kalen King did not suit up for one regular season last game. He was on the practice squad. You got the Jair Alexander situation that's brewing, or maybe nothing is going to happen. Maybe something's going to happen. But over under 60.5 defensive snaps for Micah Robinson this year.
I'm going under. First of all, I think he may end up on the practice squad, just as a numbers game, based on the depth. If Jair Alexander stays, I don't see him necessarily on the active roster, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he is on the active roster that he's often inactive on game day. The other thing is, they've been saying some good things about Ketan Oladapo in OTAs, so maybe he takes a step forward and would be ahead of Robinson on the depth chart. So I'm going under on this one.
I'm also going under too. And Oladapo, like you mentioned, this is a guy who they got some tremendous value for in round 5. It just injuries were an issue in college. They were an issue last year during mini camp and training camp and everything like that. So he's kind of behind the 8 ball, but there's a lot of versatility potentially there with Ketan Oladapo. The Jair situation is really going to determine this, though. But you do have 3 corners who I think are locked into jobs with Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, free agent acquisition Nate Hobbs. But Kalen King, who was a guy who was projected to be a high pick in 2024, had a bit of a down season at Penn State his final year there, was on the practice squad all last year. Who knows? Maybe he makes that jump to the active roster, and maybe he ends up taking some snaps at corner. The job that could come down to Kalen King or Micah Robinson for one of those final corner spots for sure. Over under, Packers 7th-round pick, offensive lineman John Williams out of Cincinnati, future astronaut. Over under 0.5 active games for John Williams.
I think he gets into at least one game. That is whether someone gets hurt, whether he just has a good week in practice, he'll find his way into one game at least this year. So barely, but I'm picking over.
I'm going to go under. I think he's going to be on the practice squad. But I think the Packers, they do want to hold on to a guy like this where he played tackle in college. He's projected to be a guard in the NFL. Guard depth is kind of limited right now in Green Bay. So there could be an opportunity for him. But really, one of these his job, though, could come down to between him and Donovan Jennings, who was on the practice squad last year, but was the highest paid undrafted rookie from last year's class on this team. So a guy who's been essentially, he's been in the workshop. He's been in the lab, and maybe a guy who's ready to make that jump to the active roster. And it could come down to one of those guys, but this just feels like a redshirt season coming for John Williams.
Could be. Of course, he could spend the season on the practice squad, be activated for one game or elevated, and we'll see.
Yeah, Gil, you're probably going to prove me wrong. So now thinking about that you can do practice squad promotions easily. Over under 1.5 undrafted rookies on the initial 53-man roster. Now, last year, the Packers did not have an undrafted rookie make the 53-man roster for the first time in nearly 2 decades. There's some good names on this list of undrafted rookies. Over under 1.5 undrafted rookies making the initial 53-man roster for the Packers this year.
I'm going over. I think it's close. This is a very deep roster overall, but I do think that we will see 2 undrafted rookies make the final cut.
Are those 2 defensive tackle Nazir Stackhouse and linebacker Jamin Johnson?
Those are the favorites, but yeah.
Yeah. Those are the two that I think. I think it's going to be over as well. I think we're going to see two guys, especially with Eric Wilson departing in free agency. There's an opening at linebacker now, and Isaiah Simmons, obviously they signed him a few weeks ago, so maybe he fills that role. But I think that's a situation where Jamin Johnson is also a former Georgia Bulldog. Nazir Stackhouse is a former Georgia Bulldog, and Brian Gutekunst loves his former Georgia Bulldogs, and sometimes seems like they get the benefit of the doubt in these kind of situations. Some other names on that list, though, that could be interesting and some cool stories. Minnesota offensive guard Tyler Cooper from St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, could be sneaky. He could make his way into the roster due to that limited depth at the guard and interior O-line. So he could be part of that competition with John Williams, with Donovan Jennings as well. A cool story also would be Northern Illinois offensive guard J.J. Lippy making the team. Lippy is from Whitefish Bay, not too far from my home parts right here, Gil.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's our over-under right there. We'll see how wrong we are coming up this season. Stay tuned, everyone, on No Huddle Radio. And Gil, before we wrap up with some trivia and be on our way out, what articles do you have coming up on Packers Post and Cheesehead TV?
Wow. Yeah, lots going on over at the Packers Post. I talked a little bit about the signing, interestingly enough, of Taylor Elgersma, the quarterback out of Canada, taking a look at what he may bring to the table and why it was a smart signing. And over at Cheesehead, I took a look at the battle for the second string running back position. We know Josh Jacobs is the starter, but we've got a lot of candidates for that number 2 spot.
I like Chris Brooks. I like Emmanuel Wilson. I liked the little bit I saw from Marshawn Lloyd.
Mm-hmm.
Should be shaping up to be a good competition for sure coming up in training camp up ahead. Gil, you ready for some trivia?
I am ready for some trivia.
All right. Well, we did quite a bit of over-under with this year's rookie draft in this week's episode and undrafted rookie class. The undrafted rookie class specifically has a couple potential feel-good stories like we just mentioned from the great state of Wisconsin. As Wisconsin natives Tyler Cooper and J.J. Lippy will be vying for jobs with the Packers this summer. Only a few former Northern Illinois alumni like Lippy have ever suited up for a regular season game in the green and gold. Gil, who was the last Northern Illinois alum to play a regular season game for the Packers? I'll give you a hint. It was from this decade.
Okay, it was from this decade.
While you think about that, I gotta just turn off the timer on the oven real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay. That is a tough one if it's from this decade. I immediately thought of running back LaShawn Johnson, who would go back quite a ways. Boy. You know, I do not know who in the last decade came out of Northern Illinois.
It's kind of a tough one, but he was a fan favorite coming out of the 2021 training camp, and that was defensive tackle Jack Heflin.
Yep.
Heflin in 2021, awesome during camp leading up to the 2021 season. One of the best stories coming out of camp that summer. He played in 4 total games with the Packers, but was released following the 2021 season. He was on Green Bay's practice squad for a few months during the 2022 season. Appeared 1 game for the New York Giants and New Orleans Saints in 2022 and 2023, respectively. Heflin's currently a member of the Los Angeles Rams. He has 2 total tackles in his NFL career. Now, Gil, Packers have drafted 2 former NIU Huskies in franchise history. Do you know who those are by any chance?
LaShawn Johnson popped into my head. So that was one. But I'm not going to be able to know the other one off the top of my head.
Yeah, I didn't either. That's why the internet is great. So the other one was wide receiver John Spillis, drafted in round 3 of the
I remember him.
Round 3 of the 1969 NFL draft. And like you said, running back LaShawn Johnson, round 3 of the 1984 NFL draft, drafted by the Packers. So there you go. You learned a little bit more about Northern Illinois. It'd be pretty cool to see a couple of Wisconsin kids become Green Bay Packers, but we're not the Minnesota Vikings. We won't just put a guy in the roster just because they're from the state. So that's just kind of the way Minnesota seems to operate. Green Bay, it's always like, hey, can you play? If you're not good enough, we're going to move you. You know,
or Minnesota operates, hey, did you play for the Packers? Okay, we're going to sign you now.
That too. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
There you go. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us this week. We'll be right back here next week. Follow us on Twitter at these Packers or to ask us questions. or you can email us at gbpackerssean@gmail.com. Make sure you're subscribed to Packers Talk on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Big thanks to PackersTalk.com for powering our show, and thank you for listening. Until next time, go Pack Go!
Go Pack Go!